Jim Bowden's back at it again. He's got some updated predictions on The Athletic, predicting where the top 15 remaining MLB free agents will sign. You know me, I got to give my thoughts on this. Let's get into it. Up first, he talks about Roki Sasaki. He says here 7 teams have met with Sasaki and his agent Joel Wolf of Wasserman, including the Dodgers, Padres, Cubs, Yankees, Mets, Rangers, and the Giants. He goes on to say that most people in the industry believe he'll end up signing with the Dodgers. However, I'm not in that camp because I think endorsement deals with Japanese companies are going to be important for him financially, since he won't be eligible for arbitration for 3 years or eligible for free agency for at least 6 years. Now, I could see that line of thinking, right? With the Dodgers, you got Shohei Ohtani, you got Yoshinobu Yamamoto, so maybe Sasaki thinks, I want to go to my own place, I want to be my own star somewhere, and I can go get my own endorsement deals where all the spotlight will be on him. So I could maybe see something like that coming into play. He goes on to say the Giants don't make a lot of sense for him based on their weak farm system and mediocre major league roster. I don't think that's very fair. I think the Giants have some pretty good players there. You got Matt Chapman coming off a great season. You just signed Willie Adames, Logan Webb, one of the best pitchers in the game. You got someone like Tyler Fitzgerald coming off a good season. I don't think that's very fair, Jim. I think the Giants are a pretty decent team. He goes on to say the Rangers are a long shot, but because they have strong starting pitching and a leadership group, maybe they have a shot. The Cubs also seem like a stretch, so he leaves the New York teams and the Padres as the favorites for him. Now, he goes on to say that Masahiro Tanaka was his favorite player growing up, which would lead me to guess he was at least somewhat of a Yankees fan. So, I don't know. I don't think that's really going to be the main thing when it comes to him picking a team. I think there's going to be a lot more to that. I think that's pretty obvious, right? He's going to go to a place where his development is going to be the most important thing, especially when money isn't really a big factor. Now, he could get some good endorsements while he's with the Yankees, but I don't know. I think that's just kind of a weak talking point, saying, Masahiro Tanaka was his favorite player, so he'll just go to the Yankees. I don't know. I find that to be a little odd. Now, he goes on to say he considers Yu Darvish a Godfather-type influence, and the Padres veteran mentored Sasaki during Japan's championship run in the 2023 World Baseball Classic. Now, I could see that coming into play, right? Has a close relationship with Yu Darvish, and he definitely could get his own endorsement deals in San Diego where he'll have that spotlight. So he says here, I'll predict he signs with either the Yankees or San Diego. Now, again, I think the Yankees talking point was a bit weak there. Maybe the endorsements, but I would say out of these two, probably the Padres have the better shot because you got Yu Darvish there. They are on the West Coast. So for me, I'll go with the Padres. Up next, he talks about Alex Bregman. He starts off by saying, I was surprised Bregman reportedly turned down 6 years at $156 million to stay in Houston because I thought he and his family were happy there. I didn't think he'd necessarily take the most money and years in free agency. Now, at one point, I did think there was a shot he could go back there because the GM, Dana Brown, sounded pretty confident that they could come to terms, but you got to remember, when you got Scott Boras as your agent, you're looking for a pretty nice payday, and when I saw the offer of 6 and 156, I thought that was a little low compared to what the projections say for a 6-year deal, which would be over $170 million. So again, when Boras is your agent, you're looking to get paid. So now the Astros, they've already turned to Isaac Paredes, Christian Walker. So Bregman, he's definitely going to be going elsewhere. Now, he mentions the Mets, but I think with the Mets, right, they're more focused on Pete Alonzo at this point, homegrown talent, and he's going to be cheaper in the end. He mentions the Mariners, but they don't want to spend money. And I don't know what the deal is with the Mariners, man. Bregman would be a great fit with Seattle, but they don't want to spend the money, so I agree with him there. He mentions the Phillies, how he would be a nice fit in the ballpark, but they've had trouble trading their third baseman, Alec Bohm. Now, he goes on to say the Tigers and the Blue Jays as the most likely landing spots for Bregman, but neither one seems ideal. Now, when it comes to the Tigers, I think they would be a great landing spot, right? You got a young team there, full of talent, ready to take that next step. It feels like they could use someone like Bregman. He would be a great fit at third base. Jace Young, you could develop him a little bit more, or you could use him as a trade asset to help improve other areas. But do the Tigers want to go the distance when it comes to giving him the contract that he's looking for? Don't forget, you got AJ Hinch, his former manager there, so we'll just wait and see on the Tigers. And with the Blue Jays, I've been saying this like a million times now. I don't know if they're a preferred destination at this point. point. Their future is looking a little murky. Vlad Jr. is not signed up to an extension at this point. So I don't know if players would be willing to take that step to go to a different country in Canada with a team that's looking a little iffy at this point. He goes on to say the Red Sox. He says here, that said, Boston is my favorite spot for Bregman. They need a right-handed power pull hitter, and he would do significant damage to the Green Monster in left field. They could move Raffy to first base and Tristan Casas at DH. Well, that sounds weird. I don't think you would do that. You just keep Casas at first base. Raffy would be your DH at that point. Or they can just put Bregman at second base full time. Now, another option, which I don't think would happen if you brought Bregman in, is you could just have Bregman play third base, Raffy can move to first, and then Casas could be used in a trade to help bring in something else to help the team. But I think the most likely scenario would be Bregman at second base. He goes on to say here, his leadership and ability to grind at-bats would help this young roster. He could be the final piece in getting the Red Sox back to the postseason. And yeah, I think that's a great point that he brings up here. The leadership, I think the Red Sox really need another guy in that role there for them, right? You got a lot of young players there. Raffy, yes, superstar player, but he's a bit more reserved. I think they need someone a bit more outspoken like Alex Bregman. I think he'd be a great fit there. He fits Fenway Park like a glove. I think he'd be awesome there. People bring up how his numbers are regressing a little bit, but I think put him in a hitter-friendly park like Fenway where his pull swing would work very well. I think it would be a great fit. I do think it comes down in the end to the Tigers and the Red Sox. I think in the end it's going to come down to which team will go the furthest when it comes to the contract, but I'll also say this, if the Red Sox are in that realm, if they're close on the money and with the years and maybe some other terms thrown in, I think the Red Sox could have an advantage over the Tigers because Fenway Park would just be a better fit for him long term. Up next, he talks about Anthony Santander. He says here, the Santander market has been strangely quiet, but all indications are he'll end up on a non-contending team and get his long-term contract. There's a lot of buzz in the industry about the Blue Jays being all in on him, and I think that's just the perfect fit. They need another power bat in that lineup, and like I said, Vlad Jr., they're trying to get him to sign an extension, and if he ends up going elsewhere in free agency next year, well, at least they'll still have a power bat in Santander. I think it just makes the most sense. They have the biggest need for him. Now, he does mention the Angels and the Giants also have some interest. I think the Angels could be a pretty fun fit there, but that defense in the outfield would just be abysmal at that point on the corners. The Giants, I don't know, the Giants feel like a weird fit to me. I'm not sure about that. Could the Tigers pivot to Anthony Santander if they bow out of the Alex Bregman sweepstakes? We'll just have to wait and see. But in the end, I agree with him here on the prediction of the Blue Jays. I think they're the best fit. Up next, he talks about Pete Alonzo. I mentioned earlier, I think Alonzo just goes back to the Mets, and that's how he starts things off here. He says here, the stare down between the Mets brass and Scott Boras over an Alonzo contract is starting to become epic. Who first, Steve Cohen and David Stearns, or Scott Boras? The Mets do not want to move beyond their last offer and don't think they have to because the first base market has dried up. He mentions all the first basemen that have come off the board. Then he mentions some teams here. The Mariners would be a great fit, but they're not in on any of the big free agents. My goodness, can the Mariners please go out there and spend some money? Pete Alonzo would be amazing for them. They need a power bat in the middle of that order. A right-handed power bat would be amazing, but I don't know. The Mariners just don't seem to want to spend the money. He mentions the Angels, how they could be a possibility. Now, the Angels would be fun. You could move Seanwell to a corner outfield spot like left field. You'd have to figure out what to do with Taylor Ward. Do you just move him out to right field? Whatever it may be. I think the Angels could be pretty fun. We'll see if maybe they could, if the Mets end up just not going the distance, maybe the Angels could end up taking that next step there. He talks about the Giants might be the only other viable option. I think the Giants would be awesome. If they could get one more power bat in that lineup, my goodness, you would have Adames, Chapman, and Pete Alonzo. I mean, that would be very good in the middle of the order. He says here, signing Alonzo to a 3-year deal with a high AAV and opt-outs might make sense for them if they could stomach losing the draft pick compensation. Hey, they did it last year with Matt Chapman. Maybe they could do the same thing here. So I think the Giants could definitely be a possibility if they're willing to go a step further than the Mets. But I really think it comes down to how far will the Mets be willing to go. He predicts the Mets. I'll stick with the Mets as well. But I say watch out for the Giants, maybe the Angels as well. Moving on to Jack Flaherty, and he predicts that he's going to go to the Braves. I don't know. I disagree with this one, and I don't like the reasoning that he gives here. He says here, I haven't heard about Flaherty being connected much with the Braves, but I think that would be an ideal match for him. They lost Max Fried and Charlie Morton in free agency. Spencer Strider, who is recovering from internal brace elbow surgery, won't be ready for opening day. They have a lot of strong young arms for the back of their rotation, but could really use another veteran. I just don't see Alex Anthopoulos spending big money on Jack Flaherty, who is an injury risk. I could see Anthopoulos maybe going to the trade market, looking at someone like Jordan Montgomery, who you'd have for a year, try and get a bounce back season out of him. Maybe just, the Diamondbacks can eat a little bit of that money. I could see Anthopoulos doing something like that, just like what he did last year with Chris Sale. I just don't think Jack Flaherty is a guy that Anthopoulos would really go after. He does mention here the Tigers not being out of the question. He also says the Cubs, Giants, and the Blue Jays. For me personally, I think the three teams that you would look at, I would say the Giants, I would say the Tigers, right? I like the Giants. I think that would be a really nice fit there. I think he would fit that ballpark very well. Gave up a few home runs this past year, so I think Oracle would be a nice remedy for that. And that'd be a nice 1-2 punch in that rotation. Logan Webb, Jack Flaherty, and you got Robbie Ray as the three. I think that'd be really nice. And then you got the Tigers, right? He thrived with Detroit this past year, had a good time there, seemed to have a good relationship with the coaching staff and whatnot. I think Flaherty could just go back to the Tigers. He also mentions here the Cubs and the Blue Jays. The Cubs, maybe I could see something like that, but I don't know. I feel like they're probably not going to go that far when it comes to spending on starting pitching, considering that they just brought in Matthew Boyd on a cheaper deal. So I don't know if they're going to go that far for Flaherty. The Blue Jays, they're just trying to get anyone at this point. I would love for the Angels to jump in the mix. I think he would be the clear-cut ace there. You'd have Flaherty, Yusei Kikuchi as your 1-2. But I think in the end, he's either going to go to the Giants or the Tigers. Up next, he talks about Tanner Scott. And the interesting part here is he says the Red Sox are the clear frontrunners for Scott. But then he gets me a little confused with the sentences after. He says here, Craig Breslow was a left-handed reliever in his playing days and seems obsessed with corralling lefty pitchers. He mentions how they brought in Patrick Sandoval, Aroldis Chapman, Justin Wilson, Garrett Crochet, and Moran. But is he using that as a reason for why he thinks they're a front runner for him? Because I don't see what that has to do really with anything. I would like to think he's just hearing that the Red Sox are at least in the mix for Tanner Scott. Now, he goes on to say Alex Cora prefers a single closer, and Scott is the best one available. Now, when you take a look at the Red Sox bullpen, I think they could definitely make some room here for Scott. Liam Hendricks hasn't pitched since 2023. I mean, who knows what you're going to get out of him at this point. They did bring in Aroldis Chapman, but I see him more as a setup option. I think Tanner Scott would be amazing at the back end of the bullpen, but will Craig actually spend the money for Tanner Scott, who I think is going to get somewhere from $18 to $20 million per year? I don't know if Craig is going to want to do that. Instead, I think he goes after a cheaper option. I could see someone like David Robertson on a 1-year deal, maybe AJ Minter, who had some injuries this past year but has a good track record, maybe someone like Caleb Ferguson, where the advanced metrics look better than the surface numbers, maybe even someone like Andrew Kittredge, but I just don't see him spending all that much money on Tanner Scott. He also mentions the Toronto Blue Jays as a possible option. Of course, the Blue Jays are trying to sign anyone. They definitely could use it because their bullpen was absolutely atrocious this past year. You got the San Francisco Giants, right? Camille Duvall really fell off this past year, so maybe Tanner Scott could be a good option. He mentions the Dodgers. I mean, hey, the Dodgers, it seems like they can get anyone they want at this point. And I think you can make an argument here that they could use a lefty at the back end of the bullpen, right? A high leverage lefty. I know you got, Anthony Banda, but Tanner Scott would be a huge upgrade. He mentions the Diamondbacks. I definitely think they could make some room here. He also mentions the Rangers, but he made this article before they signed Chris Martin, so I'm not sure if they're going to go after him. I would also pay attention to the Braves. They have been connected with Scott a little bit this offseason, and Raisel Iglesias is a free agent next offseason, so maybe you could bring in Tanner Scott on a multi-year deal. In the end, Tanner Scott, man, he's highly sought after. No surprise to see this many teams involved. Moving on to Jurickson Profar, and he says here he'd like to return to San Diego, but wants a 3-year deal, and I'm not sure if that will fit in the Padres' tight budget. Now, over the last couple of years, there's been some question marks when it comes to the payroll of the Padres, and we just got this bombshell over the last couple of days. Sheil Seidler, the widow of the late Peter Seidler, the owner of the Padres, wants full control of the organization. So you got that on your plate, and, along with the payroll concerns as well. I don't know if Profar is going to end up going back to the Padres, coming off a career year, I still think he fits very well with the Padres. They have a hole out in left field as of right now, but maybe they can end up finding a way to move Luis Arraez. He's been on the trade block in recent weeks, so if they can clear his salary, maybe they could figure out a way to bring Profar back into the fold. I would also look at the Astros here. They could definitely use an upgrade offensively in this outfield. They have been connected with Anthony Santander. Maybe Profar could be a fallback. And again, the Blue Jays, they're involved with everyone, but they've been connected with Santander probably the most out of any other teams out there. If they don't land him, maybe they could turn to Profar. The Angels have also been connected with Santander, so maybe they could turn their attention to him. But I do think in the end, the Padres make a lot of sense. I just think they need to find a way to move Luis Arraez. Moving on to Kirby Yates, and he has him signing with the Diamondbacks. Now, Yates and the D-backs have been connected this offseason, so I could see that happening, especially now that his old team, the Rangers, just added Chris Martin. They've also added Robert Garcia, Jacob Webb, Sean Armstrong, Hobie Milner. So I wonder if the Rangers are done with their bullpen at this point. And like I said with the Diamondbacks bullpen earlier, I think they could definitely use a veteran guy at the back end here with A.J. Puck and Justin Martinez. He mentions a few other teams here. He mentions the Blue Jays, right? The Blue Jays, they want everyone. The Dodgers, possibly. The Braves, he said they missed him last year. And the Reds could use a replacement for Fernando Cruz. I could see the Reds, right? Especially after giving up a high strikeout guy like Fernando Cruz. I'll also mention here the Philadelphia Phillies. All they've added for this bullpen is Jordan Romano. Now, maybe there could be some upside there, but I think it would make a lot of sense to bring in a veteran guy for the back end of the bullpen here. Keep that bullpen nice and sturdy. But Kirby Yates, after Tanner Scott, Jeff Hoffman come off the board, I could definitely see Kirby Yates getting a lot of interest. Moving on to Hyun Soo Kim. And remember with Kim, his season got cut short last year due to a season-ending shoulder injury that ended up needing surgery to repair the labrum. So he is going to be missing a bit of time at the beginning of this year. Now, the question for me is, where is he going to end up playing? Will he go back to shortstop, or will the arm be a bit of an issue and he'll have to go play second base? Whatever it may be, he's a very good defender wherever he goes. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the game. Not a big bat by any means, but a tough at-bat. He walks a lot, doesn't really strike out all that much, has good speed out there as well. So I think Kim is one of the more underrated guys out there. He did mention the Giants having interest in him until they brought in Willy Adames. He mentions the Red Sox, how he think they would be a pretty good fit. He could end up playing second base or short, whatever it may be. I don't see the Red Sox doing it. I think they want to bring in someone that's going to bring a bit more thump in the middle of the order. Now, he goes on to mention with Kim that he thinks the Padres are the best fit overall. And coming into this offseason, that's what I was thinking, right? He had the shoulder injury. Why not just go back on, say, a one-year deal, maybe with an option or whatever it may be? I mean, to me, the Padres infield defensively takes a big hit here. I say they keep him around. Now, a couple other teams I would keep an eye on here. The Mariners, right? They missed out on Hyun Soo Kim as well as Gavin Lux. So they're going to need someone here in this infield. You got Ryan Bliss, Dylan Moore. I feel like Hyun Soo Kim is going to bring you a bit more production overall for the Mariners, right? And like I said, he would miss a bit of time at the beginning of the year. Maybe the Angels, they were connected with Hyun Soo Kim as well. I think a lot of this is dependent on what happens with Anthony Rendon. If they end up cutting loose, cutting ties, maybe Rengifo can move over to third base. Hyun Soo Kim can come in on, say, a one-year deal, and then Christian Moore can end up being the second baseman in 2026. We'll see how this ends up working out, but for me, I do think the Padres are the best fit at the end of the day. Moving on to Carlos Estus, and he thinks he signs with the Cubs, and I like the reason that he gave here. He says here they could use a strike-throwing power righty in high-leverage spots late in games. If you take a look at the zone percentage with the relief pitching this past year with the Cubs, they were only 20th overall. Now, with the Cubs, you got Porter Hodge. This guy has an electric arm, but I feel like you could use a veteran at the back end of the bullpen. I think Estus would be a great addition for the Cubs. He mentions a few other teams, one of them being the Blue Jays. I know I'm mentioning them all over the place here, but I think they could make a lot of sense. Like I've said in this video already, they really need some guys in this bullpen. I think Estus would be a huge add here. Moving on to Jose Quintana, and he thinks he signs with the Royals. Now, I disagree with this one. I think the Royals are pretty much set with their starting pitching. Obviously, with Quintana, he's just going to be a veteran guy to add to a rotation for some depth, and I think they already have enough of that. They just brought in Michael Lorenzen. They're going to give Chris Bubic a chance to go into the rotation. They also have Alec Marsh here, so I feel like they already have plenty of guys. Now, again, I'm sorry to mention the Blue Jays one more time, but I think Toronto could make some sense here. Now, I've mentioned the Blue Jays could really really use someone for the bullpen. I think they should move Yarier Rodriguez to the back end of the bullpen. That guy's got electric stuff. I think he would be a nasty closer if they gave him the opportunity. Jose Quintana can just be the fifth man in the rotation. They could also use a lefty in this rotation. Moving on to Jeff Hoffman, and he thinks he signs with the Nationals. Now, the interesting part with Hoffman this offseason is teams have been looking at him as a starting pitcher. Remember, he used to be a starter, but then he got moved to the bullpen, and he's been excellent over the last couple of years. Has a 4-pitch mix, though, so teams think that he could potentially move back into a starting role. He mentions a ton of teams here, possibly a return to the Phillies. I would not count that out by any means. He mentions the Braves, the Red Sox, the Rays, Royals, Tigers, Astros, and the Nationals. And again, I think it comes down to is where is he going to end up, in the rotation or the bullpen? I do like the idea of the Nationals. They've been more quiet than I thought they would be this offseason. You know, they've made a couple of smaller moves, Josh Bell, Michael Soroka, but I feel like they're pretty close here to a competitive window. Would spending on Hoffman be a little too soon at this point? Maybe they wait until next offseason to really spend big, especially with question marks with ownership right now. But I think Hoffman would be a great idea here. He's a guy that could either be in the rotation or the bullpen for you moving forward. So there's some flexibility. There. I think it would make a lot of sense. So when you consider the fact that he could either be a starter or stick with being a high leverage reliever, yeah, his market is going to be massive. Really, it's anyone's guess at this point. Moving on to Nick Pivetta, and he thinks he ends up with the Blue Jays. Now, I disagree with the first part that Jim says here. He says, I was shocked when Pivetta turned down the qualifying offer from the Red Sox for 2 reasons. I don't think he'll get close to that on the open market, and tying himself to draft pick compensation weakens his value even more. Now, I do think he is going to have to wait a little bit because he has the qualifying offer attached to him, whereas Jack Flaherty does not. But I do think he's going to end up getting himself a pretty decent payday in the end. I was not shocked when he turned down the qualifying offer. When you take a look at Pivetta's stuff plus over the last few years, he ranks pretty high, also has a good amount of innings under his belt, so he's reliable, has good stuff. Maybe a team could take him to that next level and maybe get those surface numbers a little bit better, and he has postseason experience. So I think when you tie that all together, I think Pivetta is going to get himself a pretty decent contract. Now, he mentions the Reds checked on him at one point. The Blue Jays have been connected with him. Now, I could still see, he says here that because they got Brady Singer and they brought back Nick Martinez, he thinks that the Reds don't really make a lot of sense. But I disagree. I think the Reds could still make some sense. Now, Nick Martinez, you got to remember, he has flexibility. He can go into the rotation or into the bullpen. I mentioned earlier the Reds could use someone in the bullpen. I think Nick Pivetta can just go into the rotation, and Nick Martinez can be, a pretty solid swing man, whatever it may be in the bullpen. I still think Pivetta fits into this equation. And of course, we're mentioning the Blue Jays again. I said, we talked earlier that they could be looking for some starting pitching. Again, maybe Yarier Rodriguez can go to the bullpen. Pivetta can be in this rotation. We'll see. But in the end, I do think it's going to be interesting where Pivetta ends up. Moving on to Alex Verdugo, and he thinks he signs with the Padres if they don't re-sign Jurickson Profar. Now, I've thought of the Padres as well. Like I said, they could use a guy out in left field, and Verdugo would be pretty cheap. He's coming off a pretty down year. Now, he did play a full season. He played in the World Series. He was the last out in the World Series, but even though he had a down season, he makes a lot of contact. He plays good defense out in the outfield. I think he could be a pretty decent fit with a lot of teams. Like I said, with the Padres, he would be cheaper than Jurickson Profar, so I could see him being a fallback option. The Pirates have been connected with him as of late. He would be a slight upgrade over Joshua Palacios. Again, he mentions a couple other teams. You got the Diamondbacks here and the Giants. I think in the end, he probably ends up with the Padres or the Pirates. I also wouldn't count out the A's. He'd be a cheap signing for them, and he would be an upgrade over Seth Brown out in left field. And last but not least, he has Justin Turner heading back to the Mariners. Now, with Justin Turner, despite him being near the end of his career, he's still a pretty productive bat overall. Hit 259 this past year with a 354 on base. He's going to be a tough at bat still, a 117 WRC plus. So I think Turner still has a little bit left in the tank. I could see him going back to the Mariners here, split some time at first base with Luke Raley. I could see the Diamondbacks maybe split some time with Pavin Smith at the DH spot. I've mentioned the Padres a couple of times. They could use someone at the DH role. He also mentioned the Guardians as a possible fit. Maybe you could split time with Manzardo, Carlos Santana, some kind of a rotation there. Maybe that could happen, but I think in the end, Justin Turner, it'd probably be best if he just heads back to the Mariners. They need bats, and Justin Turner, he does provide a lot of good leadership. He was good in the clubhouse for Seattle down the stretch. So I could see the Mariners being a good fit. But everyone, those are my thoughts on the latest Jim Bowden predictions. Tell me your thoughts down below in the comments. What do you think of his predictions? What do you think of the comments that I had to say here? Let me know down below. But everyone, that's all I got for today. If you can on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. We're trying to get to 50K by opening day. But with that said, have yourself a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you next time.